Special presentation on my father, the poet. And before I begin my formal presentation, my husband is just going to share with you a short clip, a short video clip. So give us a few seconds while we adjust the screen.
Some of they can see the actual screen.
Can you see the screen right now?
Right now we can.
You can.
This should be the video.
This is the video. This is a narration by my father of his very own poem called The Railway Clerk. Should be on shortly. Here we go.
Take it from the beginning.
The beginning is an extremely long introduction. We
No
wanted
problem.
to play just about 30 seconds and then leave it to the group to actually access the video later on, because the video runs for about 5 minutes. So our intention is to play a short clip just to give the viewers and the listeners a flavor and to listen to Nissim Ezekiel's actual voice. This is the only recording we have of his voice.
Okay, here we go.
It isn't my fault. I do what I'm told, but still I'm blamed. This year, my leave application was twice refused. Every day there is so much work, and I don't get overtime. My wife is always asking for more money. Money. Where to get money? My job is such, no one is giving bribe, while other clerks are in fortunate position. And no promotion even, because I am not graduate. I wish I was bird. I'm never neglecting my responsibility. I'm discharging it properly. I'm doing my duty. But who is appreciating?
I hope you enjoyed that little clip. That's my father's voice, and yeah, I feel like he's in the room with me right now. So this is something that is just one of the videos I have. I don't really have any other recording of his voice. And now on to my formal presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank Avner from the Indian Jewish Heritage Center and the Cochin Jewish Heritage Center for this invitation to talk about my father, Nissim Ezekiel. I'd like to also thank our guest speaker, Daphna Erdinast Vulcan, and to Shimrit Levy for the introduction. I must thank Joel Malka for readily sharing his knowledge of the Ben Israelite community with me and patiently answering all my questions about our common heritage. Thank you to all those who have joined me on this Zoom call. It's always an emotional experience to talk about my special bond with my father. In this presentation, I'm going to tell stories about what it was like to be his daughter and his student, rather than just biographical details of his life. I'll be reading out two of his poems, Night of the Scorpion, which is his most well-known poem, and Soap, and one of mine, which is entitled Alibag, dedicated to my cousin Isaac, who passed away recently, and talks about my Jewish heritage. Before I do the reading, I'd like to show a few pictures of the Ezekiels.
Can they actually see the screen?
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, the first picture is of the Ezekiel siblings. There were 5 of them. And the yellow arrow is pointing to where Nissim Ezekiel was as a little boy. And the next picture is the Ezekiel family. There are my grandparents, Moses Ezekiel and Diana Ezekiel. Joe Ezekiel is the eldest. And then is my aunt Sarah, Hanan, and Lily. And the yellow arrow is pointing to my father, who is the third child of the Ezekiel family. Here we are, the three of us. My dad was about to go to New York. There is my mother, and I must have been about 2 years old. And my father went to New York for about 6 months at that time. In this picture is my aunt Hannah, or Hannah by Auntie, as we used to call her. She was actually my father's cousin, and she and her husband had no children. And I guess Nissim, who is also my cousin, who I believe is on this call, and there's me sitting on Hannah by Auntie's lap. The reason I have this picture here is because it's Hannah by Auntie who really taught me a lot about being Jewish, what it meant to be Jewish, reading the prayers, studying the Psalms on a Saturday, and talked to me all the time about the Torah and the meaning of all of that. So that is why I had this picture. My aunt emigrated to Israel when she was about 60 years old, and I really missed her dearly at that time. The next picture is of my grandmother and me. We're eating mangoes. She loved mangoes and I love mangoes, and I think everyone in India loves mangoes, except for a cousin of mine whose name I shall not reveal. And then here's one picture I have of my father and the three of us. I'm standing up there. I'm his eldest daughter, Kavita, and there's my sister Kalpana on the side there, and my brother Elkanah, who's sitting on my father's lap. I think he was unable to join us because there was a storm in Calcutta, and I think his internet is down, so he sent his good wishes to me. When I was teaching in an international school in Missouri, my father visited us in our home, and he was invited to speak at the assembly for the students. He also read out a couple of his poems, and we hosted a poetry reading for him at home. And here he is with myself, my husband, a little boy, and our dog, Toffee. And this is a picture of my father with the two grandchildren, my son Siddharth and my daughter Sunaina, taken in Bombay. This is something I have in my living room wall. It's been hanging there for almost 22 years now. It's a poem in my father's own handwriting, and it is called The Second Candle. I think this might be our final picture. This is a book written, The History and Culture of the Ben Israel in India, written by my grandfather, 4th October 1948. My grandfather was Moses Ezekiel, and he was a principal of a college in Nadiad in Gujarat. He spoke fluent Gujarati, Marathi, of course. So that is the final picture. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have one more very important picture. This is a picture of Shimon Peres, and my listeners must be wondering why I have this picture here. But I'm humbled and proud to say that my father was the favorite poet of Shimon Peres, who was the 8th Prime Minister and 9th President and a Nobel Prize winner. He always had a copy of my father's poems on his desk. And he said to my cousin, Nissim Jr., working at the World Bank at the time, and who had gone for a meeting to Israel in 2005 to assist the government of Israel led by Prime Minister Sharon and the Palestinian Authority in creating economic development following the Israeli withdrawal. This is what he said: "Your uncle is one of my favorite poets in the world, and when I need peace myself, I always turn to his poetry." He particularly liked the poem Acceptance, which is on the screen here. "I am alone and you are alone, so why can't we be alone together?" He used these lines in major public events, such as welcoming Jewish athletes from around the world to the Maccabiah Games. And that is why his picture is included here. Later on, my cousin Nandu set this poem to music, and Shimon Perez listened to that as well. Now I'm going to read a poem by my father, Nissim Ezekiel. This is a poem in Indian English, a very Indian poem in very Indian English, and it's called Soap. Some people are not having manners. This I am always observing. For example, other day I'm finding I'm needing soap for ordinary washing myself purposes. So I'm going to one small shop nearby in my lane, and I'm asking for well-known brand soap. That shopman, he's giving me soap, but I'm finding a defective version. So I'm saying very politely, though in Hindi I'm saying it, and my Hindi is not as good as my English, please do excuse me, but this is defective version of well-known brand soap. That shopman is saying, and very rudely he's saying it, what is wrong with soap? Still I'm keeping my temper and repeating very smilingly, please do note this defect in soap. And still he's denying the truth. So I'm getting very angry that time. And with loud voice I'm saying, you are blind or what? Now he's shouting, you are calling me blind or what? Come outside and I'll show you. Then I'm shouting, what will you show me which I haven't got already? It is vulgar thing to say, but I'm saying it. Now small crowd is collecting and shopman is just bigger than me. And I'm not caring so much for small defect in well-known brand soap. So I'm saying, all right, okay. This time I will take, but not next time. Now I'd like to talk about my dad as a father and as my teacher. First, I would like to talk about some of his qualities. What was he like as a person, as a father, as a grandfather, and as a man? So personally speaking. I listed some adjectives that came to mind to describe him. Calm, cool and collected, patient, taught me to ride my first bicycle, kind and compassionate, hated to see a child crying or a woman being beaten, generous with his time and money, working on an honorary basis with the PEN and the AJDC, fun and entertaining with a great sense of humor, and an indulgent father. My mother always said he spoilt me. Dinner times were wonderful with the stories of his experiences in different countries. He was a great storyteller, supportive. For example, when I wanted to go to a boarding school or on school trips and my mom had concerns about it, my father always said, let her have the experience. He was enthusiastic, full of life, larger than life, hated doctors, like all the Ezekiels, hated having his nails cut, loved his grandchildren, loved peace, and so much more. He loved the Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, and classical music. He loved nature. I can still remember him, and I'm sure some of you have seen this movie, A Fiddler on the Roof. I can still remember him dancing to the song, If I Were a Rich Man, standing in the middle of the living room, putting both his arms up and singing that song loudly. Also remember him singing the poem Trees by Joyce Gilmer, and he especially loved the last line. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. There used to be a music quiz contest on All India Radio, and they had a quiz question at the end. My father kept the postcard ready, and as soon as I knew the answer to the question, he would write it down and he would take a brisk walk to the post office and post it for me. I mentioned here in my notes, and as I know that he was larger than life, and all of a sudden he would say, let's go get some Vino Royale, which was kind of the wine that we had in those days. And my mother would say, what are we celebrating? And he would say, life. So my father was always celebrating life. And then I remember him carrying Handel's Messiah all the way from Amsterdam for me under his arm. I asked him why he wouldn't put it in the suitcase, and he said, well, I was afraid it would break. So he carried it all the way. And my favorite story of him is something he didn't tell me himself, but something I learned, is how he worked as a deckhand on a ship carrying coal to Indochina to pay for his return passage from England to India, and he won the certificate of able seaman. His poem, Background Casually, is autobiographical, and he describes his life in that poem. So that was my father as a person. Now, professionally speaking, my father was known as the father of post-independence verse in English, and he was a foundational figure in that genre of poetry. Professionally, he wore many hats. He was poet, playwright, art critic, editor, columnist, and he wrote quite a bit of prose as well. But he was best known for being a poet. He published 7 books of poetry, and he won the Sahitya Akademi Award and the Padma Shri. An award was also given to him by the Jewish community in Bombay. He was very single-minded in his goals, passionate about his work, dedicated to mentoring young poets, pensive and thoughtful, spiritual, a great teacher, my professor at the university when I was doing my master's degree. He had a very strong work ethic and was driven. He was an eloquent speaker and a voracious reader. So those are some of the points I put down for him in his professional capacity. Now I'd like to read a poem, which is his most well-known poem, and some of you might have already read this, and it's called Night of the Scorpion. I remember the night my mother was stung by a scorpion. 10 hours of steady rain had driven him to crawl beneath a sack of rice. Parting with his poison, flash of diabolic tail in the dark room, he risked the rain again. The peasants came like swarms of flies and buzzed the name of God 100 times to paralyze the evil one. With candles and with lanterns throwing giant scorpion shadows on the sun-baked walls, they searched for him. He was not found. They clicked their tongues. With every movement that the scorpion made, his poison moved in mother's blood, they said. May he sit still, they said. May the sins of your previous birth be burned away tonight, they said. May your suffering decrease the misfortunes of your next birth, they said. May the sum of evil, balanced in this unreal world against the sum of good, become diminished by your pain. May the poison purify your flesh of desire and your spirit of ambition, they said. And they sat around on the floor with my mother in the center, the peace of understanding on each face. More candles, more lanterns, more neighbors, more insects, and the endless rain. My mother twisted through and through, groaning on a mat. My father, skeptic, rationalist, trying every curse and blessing, powder, mixture, herb, and hybrid. He even poured a little paraffin upon the bitten toe and put a match to it. I watched the flame feeding on my mother. I watched the holy man perform his rites to tame the poison with an incantation. After 20 hours, it lost its sting. My mother only said, "Thank God the scorpion picked on me and spared my children." This poem, Night of the Scorpion, is included in many textbooks and is being studied in India, overseas, and in Colombia. I know that there are a few people that want to speak, so I'm just going to conclude here. Well, I actually want to conclude with my poem Alibag, but I just want to mention that I have been writing a few stories, some short fiction and some personal reflections, and they are on my poetry page. I have provided a link there. So they're all stories either about my father or in which my father has a very important role. One of them, called Walt Whitman and the Professor, has been recently published by the Bombay Review. And then there are 2 poems there in the last 2 bullet points that are poems I have written. One has been published by Poetry India, and it's called How Daddy Wrote His Poetry, which describes the process of how my father actually wrote his poetry. And the last poem is called Loss, which describes how I felt when I heard that my father had passed away. And finally, I'd like to read a poem that was dedicated to my cousin Isaac, and it's called Alibag. Starts off with a quotation by the Beatles. There are places I'll remember all my life, though some have changed. Some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. And the poem Alibag. It was a village then, a ferry the only means to get across. I went there often, even defiant of the Indian monsoons. My uncle owned a grain mill. He was a jovial man with a rich laugh. The grain poured out of the ancient machines like his patient and unselfish love for us. My aunt was kind, like all my other aunts. She raised chickens and cooked spicy food, put 10 chilies in the curry when I visited. Her usual was 20. She was an older sister to my mother. She knew we liked the food less spicy. Father had lived in England and we were accustomed to blander fare. At evenfall, we talked in soft voices. The hens were asleep. Disturbing them meant risking breakfast without eggs. Once I watched a cackling hen lay an egg. In the fields were cows and barking dogs. My cousin wove in and out of them with me and my screams on the bicycle. He teased me because I was afraid. The ocean lapped at the gates of the cottage. We walked barefoot on the sand. I skipped. He held my hand tightly so I wouldn't skip away. My cousin caught the puffer fish that looked like pregnant women. We must cook before nightfall. The lantern was the only electricity then. A rat bit my cousin's toe once. Paraffin was the cure, as I remember it. But we got there, defiant of the rains. It was home and very sweet. Holding umbrellas over our heads, willing the rocking boat to land us safely ashore. I had heard of Jesus in school, of how he walked on water and his command to still the storm. I remember praying to have that kind of faith, the kind that stills the storm. I cannot swim though, but I want to walk the earth with grace. Alibag is a village no more. My uncle has passed and the grain mill has passed on to new owners. I guess technology has replaced those ancient machines. I read of the great developments there of hotels, rich residences, and tall buildings. You can get there by car or luxury bus. I miss Alibag, the flickering lanterns, sleeping on mats, eating from thalis. I miss Alibag, the hushed whispers between cousins. I don't know when I can return to the land of my ancestors, the land of the Shanwar Telis, the oil pressers. I yearn for the unsullied rustic scenes, the dotted fields of cows, and the music of their bells, the hush of the chickens settling down for the night. And I don't know where the fish sleep, in the folds of the waves or in the folds of my memory. Thank you. Now, I believe that there are two people that knew my father, Siona and Pinhas, and I believe that they want to say a few words. So at this time, if they would, I would like to invite them to maybe share some of those memories. Siona?
We don't have Siona here, but I think Pinchas
Maybe
is here.
Pinhas is here.
Yeah, Pinchas, just unmute yourself. Pinchas?
Yeah.
Okay, the camera
You can hear
is
me?
off. We can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Your camera is off. But we can hear you, Pinchas. Okay, Daphna, can we unmute you and you can talk a little bit?
You can hear me?
Yes, Pinchas, we can hear you. Are you ready or should we ask Daphna to talk in the meantime? Pinchas?
Hello.
Okay, Daphna, we'll go to you and we'll arrange the things with Pinchas.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah?
we can. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Kavita for the wonderful talk and the poetry. It's been a while since I last read Ezekiel's poetry. I wish he were better known. I think he's a fantastic poet. And I got to know him almost by accident when the foreign ministry asked me to go to a conference in Varanasi to give a talk about him. And I said, I don't know Ezekiel at all. And they said, well, you know, you've got about a month to get acquainted with his poetry. So I managed to get a book from someone who, it was very hard to get actually, but from someone who happened to be an old friend of his. And I started reading it and I was totally gripped. And at that time, I was reading it, and then I came across his poems that are based on the Psalms. And my son was at home at the time. He was convalescing. He was in the army, but he was convalescing after an operation. And I was so taken with the poetry that I said to him, listen, you must sit down and listen to this. Look at what he does with the Psalms. I'll speak about that in a minute. And my son read it and he said, you know what? It's very much like Yehuda Amichai, who is a very well-known Israeli poet. And I said, goodness, you're absolutely right. They are very much alike in their attitude to religion, to the world, to life, to people. And this is where I started my own study of Ezekiel. I called it the subversive Jewish voice of Nissim Ezekiel. It is subversive because it takes the conventional rhetoric of the Psalms or the prayers and turns it upside down, defying, quarreling with God, you know, taking a stand against what's happening in the world. And being subversive does not mean that he's not deeply religious. In fact, if you think about Jewish religion, think about Abraham, for instance. What we have in the relationship between Abraham and God is almost a relationship of equals. Abraham argues against God. He manages to persuade him sometimes. And I think that Ezekiel is working in this Jewish subversive tradition, voicing his own anger, protest, pity for the world, for people, against the sometimes silent providence of God. And in that, he's very, very much like Amichai, who does pretty much the same thing, coming from a very religious background and then turning the words of the prayer upside down, as it were. And that's one thing that they do have in common. And another thing is that both of them, I think, turn the relations between the sacred and the profane upside down. I think what I mostly loved about Ezekiel's poetry is the way he turns everyday life into something sacred. And that, I think, is also certainly a feature that he shares with Yehuda Amichai. I don't know if, you know, this is the time to go into greater detail, but this is definitely my sense of his poetry. I think he was a wonderful poet. He managed to be both very poignant and tragic, and at the same time very funny. I love his sense of humor. And I think that came across in Kavita's talk as well. And I'm, I think I'm privileged to have had the chance of reading him and studying him and writing a little bit about him. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daphna. We have Tiona on the line, so we'll unmute Tiona. Tiona, you're unmuted.
Everything, if you find something that you
Hello, Tiona. You're unmuted. You can talk. Well, let's give her another second. Sorry for all these technical. Tiona, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was in another work meeting, and so Ruth just texted me and said to get online, and I promised I would come, but so everything is opening up over here in America now, and so some of my work has opened up. So I have, I had some meetings and stuff right now, but I managed to come on for a few minutes because my next call is at 2 o'clock.
Great, everybody can hear you, so go ahead, just talk.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say that I knew Nissim many years ago. I was out of art school, JG School of Art in 1983, and in 1985, I had my first exhibition in Jahangir Art Gallery in Mumbai, and he got word of it. He came to my exhibition. He gave me a very nice, encouraging young artist review in one of the Bombay newspapers, very prominent. He stayed in touch with me. He was encouraging. I used to meet him sometimes in the pen office, and he would give me really solid advice on being an artist. He also wrote to me when I came to the US to go to graduate school for art. I think I have a few of his letters. And not too often, at that time there was more letter writing, there was no social media or anything like that, and he never would have done that anyway. But he did write to me. I can try to find the letters. I have some of his old books that, his poetry books that he gave me, especially the collected poem ones. That is one of his older ones. I can try to find the letter or letters that he sent me, and maybe scan it and send it to Avner. I felt like kind of, I don't know how many minutes I have to talk, but I don't know if I'm going on, you can cut me short and tell me my time is over. I felt that he was kind of a very universal kind of man. But at the same time, at the core of him, he was very Jewish. He was proudly Bnei Israel. When I got to know him, at first I thought that, and now I understand that as an artist, that I am very proudly Bnei Israel, and I'm very proudly Jewish, and I love Israel and all of that stuff. But as an artist, but at the same time, I want to be more of a universal artist that can reach out to many different kinds of people, not just Jewish people or not just Indian people or whatever. So I want my work to be universal. And at that time, I didn't quite understand that about him. But now when I think back, I understand how he was truly a universal kind of artist and poet. But at the same time, he was very proudly Jewish and Bnei Israel. And he came to my exhibition knowing me as one of the only or few Bnei Israel young artists that is out of art school and is doing an exhibition. And he came purely to encourage me. And he didn't say that ever, but he was like a critic. I mean, he was an art critic also, besides being a poet. He was a very well-known art critic. So he was very well-known, and I was very flattered that he came to my exhibition. But I think what it had to do was mostly about me being a fellow Bene Israel, and he was just kind of proud that, I mean, and the artwork that I made before was very different from what I'm making now. And even the review, I can try to find the review. It was a nice review, but it was like, I see potential in her, but she has a long way to go, which of course I did. I was like 22 years old, you know. So that's what I have to say about Nissim. If you want me to say more, I can, like some of the experiences of when I went to have coffee or lunch with him. I used to go to the pen office and meet with him, and you know, I was very young and green. And so I was like, you know, always like this, like, oh, what has he got to say? You know, very much in awe of him. So,
Great. I'll unmute only Kavita. Kavita, if you want to ask any question.
I actually would like to thank Professor Daphna and Siona for sharing their experiences, and I'd love to talk with them further, and they can message me or email me. I'd like to just read a poem called Loss, which I have written about the loss of my father. I've started writing what is called tandem poetry. Tandem is like, you know, when you're riding a bicycle, for example, and you have little children and you attach a little wagon or whatever it's called, and your child is riding there behind you. So I'm kind of writing poetry alongside my father, some of it. And this one is based on a poster poem 1, which my father had written about his father. And that starts, my father talked too loudly, but just before he died. And my poem is called Loss, and it's dedicated to my father who passed away sadly from Alzheimer's in 2004. Sometimes I have difficulty getting through this poem, and if I start choking up, I'm going to pass it to my husband who's here and whom I forgot to thank for all his technical assistance and his encouragement. But if I do get choked up, I'll pass the poem to him. It happened on a Zoom call with my cousins, and I had to give the poem to him to read. So my cousin Geeta is here, and she knows that, right? So anyway, this is the poem Loss. My father could not talk to me before he died, could not reach me in a distant land. Twinned in spirit, separated by geography, I heard he remembered me, said he could never forget me. Memory without a memory, not able to remember, not able to forget. Trapped in a maze of loss, 2 losses. The greater loss is mine. Thankfully, he could not remember what he had lost.
You have to answer this question.
I have a question.
No, you have to answer.
I have to answer a question. It says, Nissim wrote a few poems dealing with the identity issue. Can you elaborate on that? Did he feel more Indian than Jewish? And can you elaborate on the choice not to make Aliyah? I think I'll answer the Aliyah part first. My father always said that he did not want to go to Israel because he said he felt he belonged to India, and particularly to Bombay. He was sometimes known as the poet of Bombay. And he really had his roots there in Bombay. So it was not just about not going to Israel, but it was more about, he said, this is my backward place, this is where I belong. And he's written that over and over again in a lot of his poems. About the identity issue, I think that throughout my father's poetry, which I've been studying every day, I have the collected poems beside my desk as I write. I think that his poems reflected his inner struggle. And I think that he was, as we're called Indian Jewish or Jewish Indian. This is always a kind of a thing, which one comes first. But I think he felt that he was very Indian and that it had not much of a conflict with being Jewish. So I hope kind of that answers a little bit of this question. Is that a satisfying answer? Yes? Any other questions?
We'll get an answer later by the chat. For the meantime, we'll allow Ilana We have Ilana Shazor, and she wants to say a few words. So
Sure.
we'll unmute Ilana, and then we'll continue.
Sure.
Ilana?
Hi, Kavita. Thanks for the many new things that you gave us, and also to Siona. I really cannot understand the deep meaning of poet in English, and I don't have enough background to get deep to it or to understand details. It's difficult. As Hebrew speaker, and as you hear my English, I'm not so much, I cannot read the poem in English and get, you know, perfect or the best understanding that can be from poem. But I have the feeling after this, what I heard here, that he was kind of the last Bnei Israeli in India, and also in a way, I wonder if he was the representative symbol of our community before it was finished, because most of the people immigrate. So I wonder what can you say about it? It seems that he's kind of a representative of people from our community that I am curious about. What do you think about it? And I have another question. Do you want the other question or later? To ask the other question?
Yes, do so.
Okay. So the other question is not so specific. It's for us as a group. I wonder how come we don't have translation in Hebrew so that it can be available for Hebrew speaker and not English speaker. And I wonder how come in Israel we don't know enough about this great poet. And we have so many English studies, and some of the people here are mainly English speakers, but we need it in Hebrew. And we need it as a project, and we have to work on it. You know, Avner, I'm practical. It has to be done, you know?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first, as I usually do. I think it's very important. It's an important point you raised about having the works translated into Hebrew. I think I saw Night of the Scorpion kind of informally translated by, I think his name was Gilad Jacobson. And he said that he would do some more translations. And also there was a translation of my poem Alibag in Hebrew, kind of informal translations. But you're right that we should have more of that available. I always wanted to learn Hebrew. I started off when I was very young. I kind of gave up. And I know more French and Spanish and those languages, of course, Hindi. And we speak Marathi at home, although my husband is from Mangalore and his language is Konkani, but we speak Marathi. So we're kind of like all over the place. But both my children visited Israel and on their birthright trips and just loved Israel. A lot of my family, my mother's side particularly, all emigrated to Israel in the late 50s and early 60s. So we had connection with them, and talking to the little children, you know, they always said, Manishma Kavita, which was sounded so beautiful to my ears. And of course, I love saying Boker Tov and Toda, and Shalom, of course, is a general greeting that everybody uses. But maybe someday I'll do the translation. I think that'll be a very ambitious project. And now I've forgotten your first question. So if you want to just tell me what that was.
The first question?
Yeah, just if you could just give me the gist of it.
Okay, do you or Siona also see him as the last?
Oh, yes, yeah, that was your question.
Of our community.
I don't know about the last, because I think there are about 5,000 Jews in all over in India left. The rest of them all went off to Israel. But yeah, he might have been a representative, but I don't know about last. So I'm not really certain, because I'm sure that there are other writers, or, you know, he was just a writer of repute.
Can you please explain by saying he can be a representative? What do you mean, or in which, you know, details?
Yeah. Very difficult. Do you have any thoughts, Alan?
Not really, no. I mean,
yeah, I don't know about the last. I'm not sure about the last representative, but he was representative. I think he was not religious, but he was spiritual, and I think we are Indian Jewish, and I think, like for me, for example, in around 2016, I started exploring my Jewish roots, and I think as we grow older, we are very we like to search, and I'm always searching, and I think most people search for meaning in life, and that connects us to our roots. And there was a question here, and someone was asking.
I can say a few words if you don't mind.
Yeah, Stianos.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to say to Ilana's question. Hi, Ilana. How are you? I'll call you sometime soon. I just wanted to say a few things about Nissim. When I was really young and I knew him, I read his poetry. He asked me to read this poem, for example, called Advice to a Painter.
Oh, yes.
At that time. And I read it, and I I was so young, so I was like taking things a little bit like as real advice. But then when I came to the US and I studied and I corresponded with him a little bit, and I kind of reread some of his poem over time, I felt Advice to a Painter was kind of a little, like he was always a little sarcastic. He was always a little prankster. He always was a little cynical. And so, like he says over here in his poem, I'm looking at it right now, don't forget to change your style every year or two. It's the only way to keep up with the times. Buy lots of paint. I'll send you some of this from here. Plan a trip abroad. All artists do. Plan publicity. All artists do. Like he was kind of almost poking fun of it. Like, you want to do all the things that you're supposed to do, but that's not really what it takes to be an artist, and that was like actually a backhanded real advice to a painter. But, if you were silly enough or stupid enough to take this as literally, I realized later, this is not what you do to become a real artist. It is something else, it is what he knew best about. He was a real artist, and he was he was cynical. He was almost like sad. And my series, which is called Blue Like Me, and about being blue in my work, is about artists being blue, as in sad, but also being the color of the sky and the ocean. So in a way, I think people like Nissim, when I think back, really influenced me so much. Without I didn't spend a lot of time with him, but, he did really make a big impression on me. Partly because he was Bnei Israel, and I was proud of that, but also because when I reread his poems, every time I see something like different, but I also see something. He's not a straightforward, like, goody two shoes kind of poet. He is very cynical. He's sarcastic. He's to be sarcastic with me. He's to kind of like teach me, but he's to be teaching me sarcastically. He's to be like, yeah, you want to become famous, right? Famous, and has to be like, well, I don't know, I don't want to be famous in that way. I want to be famous as a real artist. Like, I want to find myself. And he's to kind of like that, but he's to kind of make fun of many, many things. And that was his way of teaching in a way. And it's kind of like Jewish humor, a little bit when I came to the US, like the sarcasm, and I just wanted to say that this is what I wanted to share with you about him. So I won't say any more, but I hope this answers a little bit of your question, Ilana.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And let's try Pinchas now. Pinchas, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay,
Can I
so
speak?
please, you can speak.
Hello.
Yes, you can speak, Pinchas.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. Talk.
You don't see me. I don't see you.
No, we can't see you. Your camera is off.
You can see me?
No, your camera is off.
You have shut me out.
Should I go ahead and
Shalva
unmuted me?
Yeah.
Previously, I was seeing my photo. Now I don't see.
Okay, so just talk. It's not something that we did here. You are open from
Something
our
from
point.
your side.
Okay.
Should I go ahead and answer a question?
Yes, I think. Pinchas, you are open. You can talk, please. Pinchas?
Maybe I should go.
Okay. Go ahead, Kavita.
There was a question here about asking whether, is there something in my poetry that, is there any one aspect of Nissim's writing that you try to bring to life in your own poetry? It's really strange when I'm writing, and sometimes when I share my poems with my friends, or some of the poems are published, people always say, oh, this sounds like Nissim Ezekiel. And it's really true that I wrote a poem called Robin on the Fence, and I could actually hear my echoes of my father's voice. Very unintentionally, the poem was something completely different, but I don't know whether it's in the genes or it's just in very strong influence of my father on my poetry. There's no one thing, but I think there are several echoes of my father's voice in my poetry. But I can't write like him, that's for sure. I mean, he was a master poet, and I have a long way to go. So I'll just humbly carry on. I think that Shalva wanted to say something.
Yes, we'll just...
Shalva, are you there?
Yeah. We'll allow Shalva as well in a minute. You're unmuted, Shalva.
Yes. First of all, I'm just so nostalgic, and thank you for arranging this Zoom meeting. It's just amazing. And I've never had the pleasure of meeting Kavita. I actually knew Nissim. Can you hear me? I'm
yes.
Okay? Yeah, I actually knew Nissim very well. I've known him from the end of the 70s, when my adopted Ben Israel grandmother, Sarah Ezekiel, sent me off to Bombay and sent me to Nissim Ezekiel. I've been in your natal home. I was entertained by Nissim many times, and each time I went to Bombay, I would pop in to see him. So in 1992, when diplomatic relations were established with India, I was appointed the chairperson of the Israel-India Cultural Association. And it was an organization which didn't touch money. It just we invited people with the blessings of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I asked to invite Nissim. And everybody was very amazed. Would Nissim come? Would he even visit Israel? And I said, yes, sure, if I invite him, he'll come. And he came, and he stayed with me in my home. And he also stayed in for 5 days. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave us 5 days of accommodation in Mishkanot Shananim. For those who don't know what it is, it's like a cultural center in Jerusalem where poets and literary people come to stay. And it was there that Nissim gave his poetry readings. Now, we had a wonderful committee in those days, and Zubin Mehta was the president of this association. And we arranged a reception with Shimon Peres, because Shimon Peres told me how much he indeed admired Nissim Ezekiel and his poetry. And so we had this meeting with Shimon Peres, reception. It was just wonderful. It was like magic. And it was there that I realized that Nissim was getting he was slightly not well, and I had never realized this. And that was the beginnings of his loss of memory. And when he came to my house, I remember to stay, I was absolutely exhausted when he left, because I had to kind of make sure that he got to the right room in the right time and he didn't leave the kettle on and things like that. Now, as a man, he was really, I mean, I would love him to have been my father. He was so loving and so attentive. And he was so witty, oh my gosh. And his English, Indian English, was exceptional. I think those are the best, I mean, I'm not a literary critic, but I'm an anthropologist, but his poetry is so to the point, so witty, particularly in Indian English. It really reflects Bombay. And he made no bones about it, that that's where he was born and that's where he wants to die. And he wanted to get back to Bombay. Hanan, his brother, came to visit, came also to my house for an evening. And Nissim just was, you know, he just couldn't be away from Bombay a long time. He loved the city. He loved it. He loved nature, as you said, but he loved the city. And so he was an Indian through and through, but totally proud of his Jewish origins. And some of his poetry reflects his Jewish origins, sometimes laughing at the Ben Israel and their funny customs. There are some poems where he's quite irreverent, and so he was an irreverent person. And that was his charm as well. So I hope I haven't said too much. I was very sad when he went, and I'm sure he's participating now in this evening, and thank you for organizing it.
Thank you, Shalva. Let's try Pinchas and see if we can get him. We'll admit him again. Pinchas, are you with us? Pinchas, you're unmuted. Can you hear you? Pinchas, you're unmuted. Okay, you can hear us. So there is anyone else trying to raise a question in your chat. And if not, I think Kavita, this is back to you. If you want to say some summary words.
Yeah.
Well, I really liked what Shalva said. She said, I would have loved him to be my father. Well, I'm not sharing him with you, Shalva. So I'm keeping him all to myself. And I am absolutely so blessed to have this man as my father. And nothing I said or nothing I'll do or nothing I'll write would do justice to his memory. And the second thing she said about, you know, he loved Bombay and he loved the city. As he grew older, my husband and I invited him many times to come live with us in Mussoorie, which is in Uttar Pradesh, where I was teaching in an American international school. And he said, I absolutely refuse to come there. My father spoke very deliberately, very slowly, you know, each word enunciated, as my cousin Geeta can tell us all about that too, right? And anyone else who's related to me here knows how he speaks. So the first thing is I'm not sharing him with you. And the second thing is, yes, he was a Bombay man through and through, loved Bombay. He could not speak Marathi, but I can. And he did not speak French or Spanish, but I can. So there are some things that he would be very, I think, proud of. And he always said that when I was writing, when I was very young, he always said that I should wait because the best poets wait for words. So Daddy, I waited a long time. And from 2016, after a long hiatus, I've started writing again. And many of my poems, in fact, almost every single one of my poems mentions my father somewhere or the other. So I want to really thank Avner and the Jewish Heritage Center in Israel and in Cochin for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak about my father. Thank you very much.
Great. Guys, it was amazing. Wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again next week in the next lecture. Not next week, sorry. Next week is Shavuot. So it will be a week after, 4th of June. That will be our next lecture about Israel startup with Mr. Shlomo Gadot. So have a very cold and pleasant weekend and keep safe and well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. Maybe off so I can say bye. Bye, everyone.